Hosted by Dr. George Gaitanos, Chief Scientific and Operating Officer at Chenot. This podcast explores what truly improves health and functionality, detoxification, nutrition, sleep, metabolic health, and more. Join Chenot experts and guests for clear, evidence-informed conversations with practical takeaways you can use today. Let's begin.
Today, we're diving into a topic that is gaining real momentum in health and longevity: fasting, calorie restriction, intermittent fasting, and the fasting mimicking diet. Most people think of fasting simply as not eating. That's part of it. What's compelling is that the science shows that giving the body regular breaks from constant eating can activate powerful repair processes. Research on calorie restriction and intermittent fasting, whether eating within a time window each day or taking short, structured breaks from food, has shown important benefits: better cardiometabolic markers, improved glucose control, lower inflammation, support for healthy weight, and a reduced risk profile for chronic disease. One of the most striking findings is that fasting switches on the body's cleaning up systems. It can trigger autophagy, the cell's own recycling, clearing damaged components so the body functions more efficiently and stays healthier for longer. Here is the exciting part. Scientists have developed ways to capture many of these benefits without completely stopping eating. That's the Fast Mimicking Diet, a carefully designed, low-calorie, plant-based program that signals fasting while providing nutrients and energy. Today, we will explore what fasting and fast-mimicking diets are, how they affect metabolism and health, and why they are becoming tools not only for weight management, but for longevity, energy, and overall well-being. This is where the Chenot Diet comes in, a fast-mimicking approach designed to deliver many of fasting benefits, such as reduced inflammatory tone and a cellular reset, without abstinence from food, using precisely chosen plant-based meals to guide the body safely into a fasting-like state. And of course, it's one thing to make that claim, so we want to test it. Joining me is Professor Kostas Tsintzas from the University of Nottingham to unpack the main findings and their implications for metabolic and cellular health. Professor Kostas Tsintzas, Professor of Human Physiology at the University of Nottingham Medical School in the UK, has over 25 years of experience in human metabolic, molecular, exercise, and clinical physiology and nutrition, with over 100 publications. He applies a translational approach integrating advanced metabolic, molecular, and tissue-based methodologies in insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, and aging research. Together with the University of Nottingham Medical School, we conducted a randomized clinical study which has been published in Clinical Nutrition to see whether the Chenot Diet delivers on its promises. The results confirmed our expectation. This structured, plant-based program can trigger beneficial fasting-like changes while keeping the experience safe, balanced, and nourishing. Let's begin. Kostas, welcome. Nice to see you again. And I would like to start straight away by helping us to understand exactly what is a fast mimicking diet.
Thank you, George. It's a pleasure to be here. So a fast mimicking diet, as the name suggests, it's a diet designed to mimic some of the responses, the adaptations that the body undergoes when food is absent. And humans have evolved throughout the evolution to withstand periods of without any food. And the human body is designed to adapt to those adverse conditions. And there are several benefits of fasting, which includes changes in metabolism, cellular responses that are designed to promote survival of the human body. And the fast mimicking diet is designed to harness those adaptations, but without actually resorting to total calorie restriction, which may actually carry some risks. So it's a safer way and a shorter period of time to promote
so in
those
a way,
adaptations.
we are fasting with eating. I mean, we have this paradox that you fast while you're eating.
Yes, exactly.
But sort of so.
But it's a very low calorie diet, so we are eating very little compared with what we are used to eat on a daily basis.
And so why should we do? I mean, fasting or these fast mimicking diets? Or what is the benefit? What is the goal of it? I mean,
So the benefit is to, I guess, to build defenses. So the body builds defenses and learns how to adapt to adverse nutritional states. And the hope is that some of those benefits will persist for a while. And if this is to be repeated at regular intervals, there could be some sort of metabolic memory to allow the body to mount responses to adverse conditions, whether that's an inflammatory insult, whether that's a condition that promotes oxidative stress, for example, and so forth. So I guess the body learns how to adapt, becomes more resilient during conditions that may actually be quite adverse to the human body.
So what kind of, how does, I mean, fasting, or particularly fast mimicking diets actually work in the body? What kind of process is happening in the body? What kind of which metabolic pathways it activates?
Yeah, so the first typical adaptation to fasting is a reduction in carbohydrate oxidation and metabolism.
Glycogen.
Glucose in particular, because glucose is the main fuel for the central nervous system and our brain. And of course, in the absence of glucose, exogenous glucose coming from the food, and the fact that there's relatively low stores of glycogen in liver and skeletal muscle in our body, the body has to reduce the utilization of glucose to preserve as much as possible for the central nervous system, and therefore switches to a high fat oxidation state. And one of the benefits of the high fat oxidation state is, we have obviously plenty of stores in our body. That's how energy is primarily stored in human bodies in the form of fat. And there's also an increase in ketone body production in our livers. And ketones become a substrate for several tissues and importantly for the brain. So they take over from glucose to sustain the activities of the brain and the central nervous system. There's also an increase in what we call gluconeogenesis, so that's production of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources in our liver, primarily, but also kidney could also do that as well. And that means that glucose can be produced in the body from sources like amino acids or glycerol from catabolism of fats, or even lactic acid. So these can be used to produce glucose, which obviously can sustain the activities of the brain. There's also some breakdown of protein, obviously, in tissues, including skeletal muscle, in the first few days of fasting. But because this is not sustainable, the body reverts to an increased reliance on ketone bodies, and therefore
using fat
primarily, and gluconeogenesis is actually decreasing after the first 2 or 3 days of fasting. And there's a paradox here, because at the beginning of fasting there's an increase in metabolic rate, because gluconeogenesis is very energetically expensive. But after the first few days, that the metabolic rate will start dropping, and eventually we see an adaptation. So the body adapts to starvation by actually decreasing resting metabolism, but also decreases thermogenesis in response to any food that might be coming, if there's any food coming in. So overall, the body is trying to defend changes in energy balance. And at some point, it will reach a point where a new energy balance is being achieved, but at the price of a lower body weight. So there's multiple adaptations that occur during fasting. There's also an increase in antioxidant capacity as well during the first few days of fasting, because there's a mild oxidative stress happening as well. And the body therefore almost learns how to adapt, how to mount an antioxidant response to that mild oxidative stress, which of course will be very useful if that fasting period is to be prolonged, or if there is repeated cycles of fasting periods down the line.
Talking about the hallmarks of aging, the causes of aging, obviously fasting, it helps us to do a tremendous job, allows the body to do a tremendous job in its every single cell of the body, recycling waste and damage.
Absolutely, and that's called the process of autophagy, which is another kind of adaptation that occurs during fasting. So autophagy is basically recycling of proteins and organelles like mitochondria in our cells, with a view that the products of that recycling, which could be amino acids, for example, and other nutrients, can be reused in order to sustain survival and the functions of the body. And at the same time, it removes damaged proteins.
Because they're recycled.
Which are recycled. So there's a continuous kind of recycling. It's almost like an accelerated turnover of material within our cells, which is important for survival. And also removing waste products. And of course, that autophagy is an oxidative stress, for example, and inflammation, chronic inflammation, are typical manifestations of aging in humans. Therefore, I guess the notion is that repeated cycles of short-term fasting will allow the body to develop those adaptations and hopefully act as anti-aging kind of responses.
Yeah. So let's dive into the study and what we did using a fast mimicking diet, the Chenot Diet. So we're feeding, but we're feeding with low calories. So tell us a little bit about the protocols designed and the work that was done.
Yes, so the fast mimicking diet is a very low-calorie diet. And typically a very low-calorie diet is a diet that has less than 1,000 calories, typically around 800 kilocalories, which is a drastic reduction compared with about between 2,000 and 3,000 calories that a typical man and woman will actually consume on a daily basis. Another important feature of the fast mimicking diet is that it's very low in protein. The rationale for that is that low amino acid availability, which are amino acid building blocks of proteins, will stimulate autophagy, the process of autophagy.
So you want to reduce the content of protein?
That is the rationale for having a very low protein,
yes.
Component of those diets.
So you downregulate the command growth into the body, so the body is able to clean up better.
That's right. So you actually minimize the exogenous nutrients like amino acids, which means that then there is a greater recycling of the endogenous amino acids and proteins. Another important feature of the fasting mimicking diet is the fact that it is mainly plant-based as well. So the fat content of such diet will be mainly poly or monounsaturated fat. And it's also solid. So unlike some of the meal replacement diets, which tend to be liquid in form, a typical FMD, as we call it, is mainly solid. So these are proper food items that are being prepared, cooked, and consumed by the individuals.
So tell us a little bit about the design of the study and the findings.
So we decided to conduct a study that examines the metabolic, cardiovascular and functional effects of a typical fast mimicking diet, which is a plant-based with low protein intake, so less than 10% of the 850 kilocalories would come from protein. But we wanted to also compare it not only to a control diet that provides the normal amount of calories and is not expected to obviously lead to any energy imbalance. We also wanted to compare it to a fast mimicking diet, still plant-based, but with a high content or higher content of protein. And when we say actually high protein content, we mean that effectively we provide the amount that is recommended for healthy individuals in terms of daily consumption, so roughly about 0.8 to 0.9 grams of protein per kilogram body weight per day.
So let us focus now on the low protein diet, where the diet is 850 calories 40 per day. 45% of these calories come from carbohydrate, 45% from fats, and only 10% comes from protein. So what did we find in this diet?
So the main findings was, and this diet was followed for 7 days, 1 week, was that there was a reduction in body mass as expected. There was a reduction in total fat mass, including both visceral fat and also subcutaneous, so fat under the skin as well. So both of those compartments were reduced substantially. There was also, at the molecular level, we measured gene expression of molecules that are actually involved in autophagy in blood samples that were obtained before and after the period of diet. And there were clear changes, upregulation of a number of autophagy genes. So at least at the molecular level, we had an upregulation of autophagy, as perhaps we expected. There was also significantly a reduction in blood glucose. So we had about 10% reduction in blood glucose. And that's quite important because these are primarily individuals with normal glycemic control or normal fasting blood glucose levels. And despite that, there was still a reduction of about 10% in blood glucose. There was also a reduction in IGF-1, which is the insulin-like growth factor 1. That was about 35%.
Which is a very important marker.
Which is a very important marker because it obviously associated with inhibition of mTOR and stimulation of AMPK. These are important inhibitor in terms of the mTOR and stimulator in terms of the AMPK for the autophagy.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, for some of the metabolic adaptations that occur at the cellular level. So, of course, AMPK is a kinase that is regulated by the energy status of the cell. And during this FMD period, there are changes in the AMP to ATP ratio within the cell, which obviously activate AMPK, which is very important in terms of the activation of autophagy.
And if I remember correctly from the data on the paper, also we saw some activation of anti-aging genes. I remember that the expression of sirtuins went up.
That's correct. Sirtuin 1 and FOXO.
Yes. So we can say that Chenot Diet, what we actually did, it does delivers to its promise, like activating autophagy, this cleaning up mechanism, and also has an anti-aging perspective is really...
Absolutely, yes. There were definitely at the molecular level, there were changes in autophagy and anti-aging effects, which obviously accompanied the metabolic effects we described, and also the body composition effects that we described previously. So there was a multitude of metabolic and molecular effects.
With a benefit, of course.
Beneficial effects,
Yes,
absolutely.
yes. So we experimented in order to see what will happen when we change the protein content. So we reduce the fat content, we increase the protein content, what we call a high protein fast mimicking diet, and trying to understand what is actually happening in the body. Are we going to have the same results or not? So what did we find?
So I think that the main outcome is that energy restriction per se, the level of energy restriction,
is the main driver,
which was the same in both arms, both FMD arms, is the main driver for some of the beneficial effects we observed in terms of autophagy, body composition,
so this diet
blood
also
glucose, and IGF-1.
So produce similar results.
Absolutely. Which in a way one may find surprising, because it is expected that higher provision of protein and amino acids may actually lead to activation of mTOR, which then may have an inhibitory effect on autophagy, but that did not happen. And there are studies in the literature where autophagy is not always related to availability of amino acids. But that was an important finding, because it means that it is safe in terms of autophagy activation to actually, at least at the molecular level, it is safe to increase the protein content to what is normally recommended. But we had some interesting effects. So in terms of some differential effects between the two diets. So the higher protein diet, although the total fat mass loss was similar, the contribution of the different depots, i.e. visceral versus subcutaneous, the under the skin fat, was slightly different. So the high protein diet promoted more visceral fat loss compared with the traditional lower protein diet. So that was one kind of beneficial effect of the higher protein diet. The other one was that it promoted changes in the gut microbiome. So the total number of species was higher after 7 days on that higher protein diet, whereas we didn't see significant changes following the typical FMD.
Maybe because of the greater nutritional variety of
Perhaps it appears that improving or increasing the protein content had some effect in terms of the biodiversity of the bacteria in our gut. Of course, the difficulty here is, and I think that's throughout the literature, the challenge is to interpret those data in terms of gut health, and whether, I guess the question is, what is the functional outcome of actually changing the number of species in our gut and the biodiversity, as we call it, but whether those changes persist after 1 week of such intervention. But of course, it's a very kind of promising, I think, change in gut microbiome. And finally, another difference between the two diets was that there were lower circulating lipid levels after the high protein compared with the low protein FMD. In terms of triglycerides were lower in the high protein diet.
But can we safely conclude or say to our audience that the calorie restriction is the main driver of the effect and not so much the macronutrient content, what we have in the food? So can we say that overrides, a lot of the effect?
Absolutely. The level of calorie restriction and the degree of negative energy balance that incurs as a result of that is the driving force
for the benefits.
For the health benefits that we have observed. Adjusting the macronutrient of the diet allows you to perhaps tailor those diets towards particular populations.
Yeah. So, for example, if you have, for people who are older, adding a little bit of protein, I want to say that the study was done on plant-based, and the protein was given as a food supplement. It was not really...
Yes, the extra protein was provided as soy
from a
proteins.
Plant,
yes.
Yeah. So in relation to the fast mimicking diet, because it's restrictive, low calorie, who should not follow?
So it is recommended that women that are pregnant or lactating, children, perhaps adolescents during the growth spurt, and people over the age of 70, in particular people who might be prone to sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle mass and strength as we age. It is recommended those populations should really avoid undertaking the fasting mimicking diet.
And I want to also say that here, we need to distinguish between animal and plant protein. So we're not talking, when we talk about protein, we don't talk about meat.
Yes.
We talk about plants.
Absolutely. So it's a healthy diet. Yeah. Both of them are healthy diets.
Yeah. And it's important because you make a break from your everyday eating, It's
But certainly if you have individuals that have excess visceral fat, central abdominal obesity, or perhaps have elevated circulating cardiovascular risk factors, perhaps a diet higher in protein and lower in fat will be
this amount of calories,
yes,
850,
will be of benefit to such individuals. Perhaps individuals that have some kind of gut health issues, they may also benefit from this higher protein diet as well. And as you mentioned, perhaps individuals that may be at risk of sarcopenia, for example.
Yeah.
Although
what about women? I mean, we know that they're going through phases in the cycle. Maybe during luteal phase, it's a good,
So luteal phase.
Because I find women when they are in that phase, when they
Yes.
come to us, they struggle. Some of them with the diet.
Absolutely. And that's a very interesting point because during the luteal phase, there is an increase in metabolic rate. There's also reported changes in appetite and cravings for food, although I must admit that the literature on this topic is quite murky, and there's equally studies that have shown no changes in actual food intake. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, there is certainly changes in hormonal profiles during the luteal phase. And therefore, having a higher protein content perhaps, which we know has a greater satiety effect compared with the other macronutrients, may actually help, especially when it comes to solid protein as well as opposed to a liquid form. That may help with food cravings and food intake during the FMD. So perhaps that could be an approach during the luteal phase as opposed to the follicular phase. So during menopause, in particular during the perimenopause, as we call it, which is the few 2 or 3 years before the start of menopause and 2 or 3 years afterwards, there is a non-linear increase in body fat mass in women, and there is particular redistribution of fat from the femoral gluteal area of the body into the more visceral central depots. And that's specifically linked to menopause and not necessarily to aging per se. So there is this kind of spike, an increase in fat mass, and given the benefits of the FMD in terms of the loss of fat mass, and in particular the FMD with a higher protein intake, the greater loss of visceral fat, one would imagine that such an intervention will be beneficial to women that have been going through menopause, that have gained weight, and we know that that gain in weight is associated with a worse metabolic control. In particular, women who decide not to take HRT after the start of menopause as well. And those women are more prone, certainly after menopause, women in general are more prone to developing cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease like diabetes and so forth, and perhaps may even be more prone to sarcopenia as well. Therefore, I think that a supervised FMD will be of benefit.
With the findings we have, it gives us a lot to think about and how we can actually personalize, like as you said, for every single individual.
Absolutely. The findings do allow us to fine-tune the FMD to specifically tailor the needs of a particular individual.
Yes. Do you see a benefit of doing this diet and keep your exercise plan at the same time? Because you have very low calorie intake.
Absolutely. And one of the adaptations to fasting and a very low calorie diet is that there is a decrease in protein synthesis, both in the post-absorptive state and the fasting state, but also in response to a meal as well. So, and that potentially might be an issue because a reduction in protein synthesis compared to protein breakdown may predispose somebody to loss of lean body mass, including skeletal muscle mass. And that's kind of concern for a lot of people. But there have been studies done during very low calorie diets, not necessarily FMD, but very low calorie diets of similar energy deficit, where people performed resistance exercise, supervised, progressive loads for up to 3 times per week, and that has actually eliminated any loss of muscle mass. So I think combination of exercise and higher protein intake. So most of the studies have shown that you probably need even more than the normal recommended protein intake of 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight per day in order to actually maintain muscle mass.
What would you recommend, now talking of the subject of reintroducing food after the fast mimicking diet? What would you recommend? How should one proceed? Let's say we have somebody who's done 10 days or 1 week, this FMD diet. How do they reintroduce food? Do they go slowly by selecting special, foods, or they just go back to normal eating?
I think the reintroduction is very important, and it should be gradual. There should be a phase in. So I think you should not go straight into 100% of your normal energy requirements of your habitual diet.
Yeah.
So there should be a gradual, within the first few days, increase in food intake, because we know from clinical examples, individuals have been malnourished or have taken little energy, little food for a period of time. There might be some changes in electrolyte balance, especially phosphate, magnesium, potassium. And also there is a depletion of those electrolytes in skeletal muscle as well. So when we actually reintroduce food, those should be repleted, but it may create an imbalance in circulatory electrolytes, and therefore, and that could cause some adverse effects, health effects. Therefore, I think there should be a gradual phase in over 3 or 4 days, perhaps starting from about 40 or 50% of what we normally consume. and then go back to 100% maybe within the next week or so.
Yeah. In terms of micronutrient content, I think the protein reintroduction it should be scaled or...
The most important one is carbohydrate, insulin, because insulin will drive the adaptations and restoration of the electrolytes. Of course, amino acids can also stimulate the secretion of insulin. So there has to be some care for both reintroduction of carbohydrate foods and also protein foods.
A lot of people are asking us, should I reintroduce protein in terms of fish, chicken, or plant-based, or does it make any difference, you think? Or?
I wouldn't imagine so. I think it's the absolute amount of carbohydrate and protein as well, the absolute amount of calories that is more important here. So we need to kind of reduce the overload of carbohydrate availability and excessive secretions of insulin the first few days after reintroducing normal, habitual diet.
We talk about protein, but I want to clarify the difference between lean mass and muscle mass, because we did the study using DEXA, and of course we don't calculate. It doesn't measure muscle mass. We measure lean mass. So when people see reduction in lean mass, they think it's reduction in muscle mass, or you're losing muscle. So can we clarify the difference, please, between the two?
Yes. So as you rightly said, the muscle mass is only part of the lean mass. During very low calorie diet, we lose also water, body water. We lose muscle glycogen, and liver glycogen. Those depots are reduced, and glycogen is associated with water when it's stored. So there's a loss of glycogen and body water. There's also changes in the mass of different organs and tissues. For example, the liver mass is substantially reduced during very low calorie diet. Same applies to the kidney. Brain is unaffected. There's some evidence that even the heart muscle might be reduced slightly. So therefore, when we describe changes in lean body mass, these are not entirely associated with loss of muscle mass. Muscle mass is only one component, and not too many studies measure muscle mass.
Yeah.
One of the gold standards of measuring muscle mass is using MRI, and not too many studies have used MRI in the context of very low calorie diet.
As you know, we're doing these diets now for many years. We have a lot of experience, and we're trying to create an emotional experience, because it's food, is eating. It's not just, and we want people to eat mindfully. We want people to concentrate on their food, masticate well, and take their time, to do this. But we're still delivering 850 calories almost to everybody. And we have people who are young, we have people who are older in age. So my question is 850 for everybody, and for whom is not?
That's a very interesting question. I guess typically a very low calorie diet is characterized by various organizations, or is defined as 850 calories and below. Some of the diets are below that. I guess one of the reasons is that a very low calorie diet really should be below the resting metabolic rate of a given individual.
Which is the amount of calories you need
just to sustain the biological processes
without activity
in our body at rest. Correct. So of course the resting metabolic rate varies depending on sex, depending on body size and body composition. So anything less than 1,000 kilocalories guarantees that for most adults, this will be below the threshold of the resting metabolic rate. Yeah. And of course, we have a reduction in metabolic rate. That's a typical adaptation to fasting. So I think 850 calories and below guarantees that all individuals will have an intake that is less than the resting metabolism, and therefore there will be a substantial negative energy balance being implemented for all. But of course, for some people, the absolute deficit will be much greater than others.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
But, sometimes I think of this low-calorie diet, and I start realizing that if you want to create benefits within your body, I mean, you can actually, there's a lot of things you can do at home in your everyday lifestyle. I think that's important. And you also realize that most of the time, all of us, we are overeating. We are eating more than we actually need.
That is why, George, the intermittent fasting paradigms have become so popular. So the 5-2 diet, for example, where people are following essentially a very low-calorie days for twice a week, for example, on either consecutive, non-consecutive days, or the alternate date fasting.
Or the 16-8.
Or the 16-8, what we call the time restricted eating.
So they give time to the body to process damage. Basically, that's why they do it.
Yeah. So we extend the daily in the case of TRE, we extend the daily fasting periods because we do fast on a daily basis when we sleep. Yeah. So most humans will fast for about 10 hours a day on average. But of course, if you can extend that to about 16 hours a day, we already see beneficial effects within a few weeks. So there are ways by which we can implement fasting paradigms or different versions of fasting paradigms and do experience similar effects.
Yeah. So, I think we've covered the topic extensively about the study, and I think it's very, very clear that calorie restriction does drive longevity in a way, if I can say that. I mean, it has a lot of health benefits. Enables you to maintain functionality. You build your resilience, your defense mechanisms. You're creating health in a way. So if you do it in short periods of time, and you repeat that after 2 months, 3 months, whatever, you do get a benefit. But from your point of view, if we have 1 or 2 takeaways from the study, what would you say?
I would say the key message is that severe energy restriction for a short period of time is beneficial. It's associated with several metabolic and molecular adaptations that potentially can improve health. In terms of longevity, there is animal studies, animal models, where calorie restriction has been associated with longevity. Of course, these experiments are difficult to be done in humans. So we have to be cautious in terms of actually translating those findings into longevity in humans, because those studies have not been done, and there's certainly difference between animals and humans. But the benefits are promising, and it seems that changes in the macronutrient composition of the diet could be used for specific populations.
To personalize.
To kind of personalize the FMD to different populations without the fear that we are going to lose the kind of key drivers of a fasting mimicking diet.
Well, I think this concludes our episode. I would like to thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your good work and the study we did with the diet.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all your team for helping us to put evidence into what we do in daily practice. Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you for listening. For more, visit chenot.com. The information in this podcast does not constitute medical advice. Always speak to your doctor or another qualified healthcare professional about your individual needs.